Annie Crawford is a cultural apologist, classical educator, and homeschooling mom whose passion is to help others look at the world around them and see that all truth is God's truth. She works at the intersection of faith, imagination, and education, guiding others to engage culture thoughtfully through a Christian worldview. For the last 2 decades, Annie has worked to reintegrate education and discipleship by creating classes, lectures, and discussion groups for both school and church contexts. In 2014, Annie co-founded Vine Classical Community, where she currently teaches apologetics and humanities courses for their high school program, Vine Classical Hall. From 2016 to 2021, Annie helped develop the Faith and Culture Ministry at Christ Church Anglican of Austin. And in 2021, she co-founded the Society for Women of Letters, where she currently serves as Senior Fellow. Annie is also a member of the Ciceronian Society, a network of Christian scholars committed to cultural and civic renewal. Annie teaches online courses for the symbolic world and writes on theology, culture, and education. Her work has appeared in Salvo, The Symbolic World, The Shadowlands Dispatch, and An Unexpected Journal, which she helped found in 2017. Her writing and speaking is focused on 3 important S's in postmodern culture: story, sex, and science. As an undergraduate, Annie had the privilege of studying literature and philosophy with Alan Jacobs, Leland Ryken, and Arthur Holmes at Wheaton College before finishing a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Studies at the University of Oregon and a Certificate of Biblical Studies from Ecola Bible College. She holds a Master's in Science in Christian Apologetics from Houston Christian University, where she studied with Inkling scholars Michael Ward and Holly Ordway. A native Oregonian, Annie loves strong coffee, black licorice, detective novels, and escaping to the mountains with her husband and children, preferably on horseback. She's also a committed fan of Harry Potter and believes good stories shape good souls. That's a very good bio. And we got a whole interview just where we could run on questions from that bio. That's a lot. You don't look that old, my dear.
Thank you. God bless you. The saints right there. I am 48.
Oh my goodness. So how old were your children?
23, 21, 19.
Okay.
Yeah. So I finished homeschooling, and they're all in that next young adult phase, mostly living at home, trying to find, develop their careers and all that.
Mm-hmm. So you and Ron both met at Midwestuary, is that correct? Briefly.
A quick second.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was too many people to connect with. It was wonderfully overwhelming.
The reason I wanted to talk with you and a few others is after Charlie Kirk got shot, my world, it didn't fall apart. I was wounded, profoundly wounded spiritually. And so I knew, so what the reason I wanted to talk with you is I'm looking for voices that are, for the lack of a better word, prophetic, and that you can navigate waters. And we had who helped me out, Mark, yesterday when we were talking. The prophetic was broken down into a variety of categories. It was obviously sometimes it's the future. Mm-hmm. And then it was Martin, I think he said I don't know why, but he said it also deals with justice. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about the fragmentation of the prophetic, which I didn't quite understand, but you might. For me, it is to listen to people such as yourself. I like you, Jordan Hall, Paul Vanderklay, because it's like getting intelligence about the enemy, where things are going, why things are going that way, and possible solutions, or just how to write it out.
Mm.
So I'm looking for a lot of your thoughts and opinions on that. And we'll just kind of see how things go. Does that make sense, what I was asking? You're asking?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think I found in Jonathan Pajot, why he caught my attention and was because I heard in him this kind of prophetic voice that I think you're talking about. And when I discovered Jonathan Pajot's work, I thought, that's exactly what this cultural apologetics movement is trying to do. We think of cultural apologetics as recognizing that people form their beliefs not just because they're brains on a stick who think through, logical debates and syllogism. Our beliefs are informed by our imagination, our experiences, the social imaginary, the habits, the liturgies we live into. All those things do so much to shape the way we perceive the world and what kind of ideas become plausible or desirable to us, right? So that's what I would say cultural apologetics does. I think Pajot does a lot of that by addressing the way that stories and symbols form our understanding of meaning. And I'll connect this to how is that prophetic? I think that's prophetic because I think what a prophet does, I mean, yeah, there could be
I understand.
understanding. Go ahead.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you.
Yeah. Because I think some of prophecy, we could just call it pattern recognition, right? That if the world lays itself out in certain structures or patterns, the more that we perceive those cosmic structures and those patterns, then the more we can look at what's happening around us and discern sort of the outlines emerge amidst the chaos, right? And so the people who are able to do that are then able to speak in a way that feels prophetic because you can say, no, I see the way this is laying itself out. And there's a predictive power in that, right? Where here's the way reality works. Here's the way that structure is going to lay itself out in what's happening now. And then you can foresee sort of the immediate impact of that. And I think that's connected to justice because righteousness or justice involves living in accordance with the logos, with the created order that God has given the world. That's what justice is. And so part of the prophetic role is saying you are not living into the created pattern that God has given you, and that exhortation, right, to return to the Lord, to repent and return toward loving mercy, right, and loving justice. And so that would be, I completely understand with what you're saying. I think, we live right now in a moment where the worlds are changing, where one world is dying and another world is emerging, and that estuary space or that mixture space or where one thing's falling apart and another thing is emerging is a really confusing space. And so we need more than ever with a kind of urgency, the people who have deep pattern recognition and can help us keep a clear eye, kind of almost like we don't get nauseous. How what I come to think of is you're on, my husband gets seasick. It's when he loses sight of land. And then the waters of chaos start to make your body confused and nauseous. And kind of what that prophetic role can do is hey, here's the land, here's the orientation. Keep that in mind, the cosmic structure as we're going through these waves of transition. Is that speaking to kind of what you're thinking about at all?
Yeah, actually it does. And I'll bump it up a notch and I'll reveal a little bit about myself and maybe help kick this thing into a gear. When I was my comedy name would be Shaman Ron, because I was a shaman wannabe. I was that guy at the powwows. I am white. There's nothing native in me. But so when I did all the drugs, because I was trying to reach, spirits, things would spin out badly. And I feel like that's what's happening culturally. And I love what you said, and I agree with it. But just to put it in perspective for people who are listening, it's a bad trip. And in a bad trip, you can get damaged. But if there's someone there to help you through it, you might get some bumps, but you're not lost and you're not permanently damaged. So,
Makes sense to me.
okay. Yeah. Well, and so what do you see going on? Because you said the 3 S's, and I feel like all of them are getting messed with. So where does this go, and how do you navigate it? Or at least how do you navigate it?
Oh, that's a really big question.
Because I have my opinion. I don't want to. It's a big question, but that's kind of why I asked you. Maybe like what do they call it? A 30,000 foot view, and then kind of zoom in where you feel the information would be helpful, or wherever, whatever you think.
Yeah, so 30,000 foot view. Let me try offering one frame, and then we can move from there in more helpful directions as you'll discern. But we are going through the death of the modern era, and we've been going through it for a while, right? So I always teach. I teach great books. I teach, I walk students through the great texts that have formed Western civilization since Genesis, through the ancient world, through the medieval world, through the modern world. And so my mind is always moving through this historical map, the development of human consciousness and understanding and culture. And so the chaos, the bad trip we're going through is the collapse of the modern frame, which attempted to grasp control of the world through reason and science. That at the end of the medieval world, we had the scientific revolution, which brought about such impressively effective knowledge and power. And I think we made this move that we didn't have to make. So what the scientists were doing, like Galileo and Newton and Kepler, who were devout Christians, who were largely motivated in their scientific endeavor by their desire to worship God through seeking out his wisdom and his presence in the created world. Kepler says, thinking God's thoughts after them. And so they made scientific advancement by sort of, I'm always struggling for the right word, the right verb here. Maybe y'all can help me. But like setting aside matter and motion from an overall context that would include, for Newton and Kepler, meaning and purpose and spirit and mind.
Let me try something out.
Yeah.
I want to back you up to this thing you mentioned a little bit ago, to cultural apologetics, because I think we can circle back around to where you were talking. Explain to me what you mean by that phrase.
Yeah, so apologetics, giving a reason or a defense for what you see, what you believe as true. And usually we think of apologetics as offering arguments, rational arguments, historical evidences for the resurrection. But what we've come to see is that people form their understanding in holistic ways through what they experience, what they love, their desires, their imagination. And so the cultural apologetics is really trying to work at that level, at the level of culture, how you're formed by the way you live, how you're formed by the stories that you tell. And so, that's not to say that there's no place for argument and dialectic, because we are also rational. We also have reason, and we ought not, we don't want to be fideists who we just pick our beliefs outside of reason. Reason should be part of how we understand the world, but it's not exclusive to the way we understand the world. And C.S. Lewis is considered the father of cultural apologetics because, he was highly philosophical, highly rational, known as a first-rate debater. But in his experience, he noticed that his persuasive powers, even though he was at the top of his game, weren't as effective as he wanted them to be or thought they ought to be. And he began to meditate deeply on the role that imagination plays. And so, reflecting on his own life, I think y'all know how it was for him like Norse myths that really opened him up to the possibility of a spiritual world, of a world beyond the material. It was the song of the North that lured his spirit out of his rationalism. And so Lewis thought, what is this? What is the relationship between reason and imagination? And he argued that while reason is the organ of truth, that we use logic in order to say, A is not B, A plus B equals C. We'll use reason to discern truth in that way. But A, B, C, that doesn't have any meaning except through imagination, that it's actually through imagination. The images we have in mind, the symbols we have in mind, the experiences we hold in mind, the stories we hold in mind, those are the things that give content meaning. And so, for a modern world, we'll kind of get back to this modern, what moment are we in? Modern rationalism and scientism had trained our cultural imagination to perceive things as merely matter and motion. And then, we were telling a materialist story. We were imagining things through the lens of science and machines, and that was a reductive social imaginary. And so then when Christians would talk about spirit or resurrection or God, those words don't really have any substantive, meaningful content for people. One thing I encounter that's so wild to me is still so often you use the word God and people think at the level of like Zeus. Oh, you think there's some like guy floating around in the sky. That's not at all what Christians classically mean by God, but our social imaginary doesn't provide meaningful content to spiritual language anymore. So that, in a sense, is the moment we're living in. This is why people will talk about re-enchantment, is we've run out to the end of what a materialist, rationalist frame can provide. It no longer sufficiently explains the world as we experience it. And so we're grasping and reaching for other categories, other frames, other tools. And the language of spirit is coming back, but we don't all necessarily have a coherent idea of what that is anymore. And so I think that's, to kind of return to the idea of the old world is dying. Scientism and rationalism is not sufficiently explaining what we're experiencing, such as Charlie Kirk's death, because we feel it. We feel that event resonating in the heavens. We feel some kind of, I think of in Perelandra, Lewis has his character Ransom go to Venus, right? And he's on Venus and he meets a woman and he meets a little dragon and And then Weston flies in a spaceship. So there's things happening that, are comprehensible on a material, physical basis. But Ransom says he felt like he was living in a myth, that the things were happening had this kind of potent, mythological, symbolic significance that was hyper-saturated relative to like normal human events. And I think we're entering an era like that. The COVID, all that happened, the election of Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, it has a kind of like mythic potency to it. The killing of Charlie Kirk had this kind of mythic potency to it. And we're trying to grasp for a language or a frame that can explain this. I keep thinking of the return of the gods, that divine spirit powers, principalities are making themselves felt and manifest again. And we are trying to find ways to grasp that, talk about it, name it. Which is really what, all that back to cultural apologetics, that's what the cultural apologetics tries to do, is try to offer stories and symbols that can shape your way of imagining the world, that will be more fruitful, that will be more in line with a true vision of the world.
So would you say that Newton's interest in alchemy be part of his story making, or in his science behind, or to bridge his scientific explorations?
Yeah.
And would a corresponding, or I guess analogous to that would be for C.S. Lewis, his abandonment of analytic philosophy for myth and literature, be part of his way of giving meaning to his own times? Because it seems like because at one point I believe when you and Sam, I believe, were talking about this, that he had he found analytic philosophy of the early 20th century to be pretty empty of meaning, and so he pivoted to myth and literature. Is that accurate? And do you see a correspondence between what's happening with Newton and with Lewis?
Yes. I think he sought an integration, right? So trained as a modern philosopher, a modern rationalist, he was academically trained to see reason as the only mode of real knowledge. And I think what he realized is that's not true. There are multiple forms of knowledge. Reason is one of them. And he was seeking a way to properly integrate the modes of knowing. So not an abandonment for the other extreme, but a recognition that we need both, and an attempt to try and weave them together effectively. So for example, you think of the silver chair, it's a fairy tale, it's full of symbolism and rich literary allusions, and it's very mythic. But within the silver chair, he's providing Anselm's ontological argument as well as Pascal's wager. So he was still trying to integrate dialectical, rational understanding properly with intuitive, symbolic, mythic knowledge. Where he was raised to see one as the only true way of knowing, he's like, no. There's multiple ways of knowing we need to bring together into a holistic way of perceiving the world.
Ron, did you have a question?
I'm kind of chewing on some things, because it's why. Okay, so it seems like I came from the New Age, and it seems like, I'll give you the good news first. I've had friends who were on like silent retreats after being on an ayahuasca retreat, and Jesus coming in saying, "Hi, come on, it's time to go." And they weren't even looking for me. And they're like, "Okay." And this is happening a lot. It seems like the old gods are becoming in vogue, and Jesus, it feels like Jesus is now the visiting team in the world. It's no longer Team Jesus, at least in the United States and in the areas I travel. It's more like Christianity is becoming secondary, and any religion except Jesus is pretty much cool. Except there's this weird lightning strikes happening where God's coming in sovereignly. And I see, it's almost like I'm seeing this, and then the world is actually acting crazy at the same time. And I'm guessing they're tied together, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
What would C.S. Lewis say about that? What do you think?
Yeah, he in the Screw Tape Letters. Have you all read the Screw Tape Letters?
Mhm. Yeah.
He talks about the tactic, because you said this, like, I think at the beginning of our conversation, feels like we're some of us are able to have sort of intel on the enemy. And in a sense, that's Screw Tape Letters, right? Lewis perceiving what's going on at the spiritual level, in a sense, and trying to find a way to communicate that to people. And one of the key ideas he has is he has the demons kind of talking to each other to reveal their plan. And one of their plans is to create their perfect work. The materialist magician. Do you remember him talking about this?
No, but I need to check that out. That's awesome. The
It's
materials.
fascinating.
Oh, wow.
And then
Okay.
he really develops that idea narratively in the Ransom trilogy through the character of Weston. But, he says, well, during the modern era, our tactic has been to hide ourselves. So it's to convince people the spiritual realm doesn't exist. And if they don't believe the spiritual realm exists, then they won't worship God. And, we've got them that way through their apostasy, their denial of God, by pretending there is no spiritual realm. And they're like, but there's a downside to that, because we can't produce quite as much evil as we really would enjoy producing if they treat the world as, kind of mechanical. We really want to be able to corrode the soul more. So the materialist magician, Lewis imagines, is where you've brought in materialism so that people no longer acknowledge God or good spirituality, but then you begin to mythologize science, so that people will be open again to spirit. And we can think of like powers and principalities that come from above, but they'll only be open to it in terms of power. We'll have shut out good spirit, we'll have shut out God, and then we'll slowly open them up to spirit. So what he says is like mythologizing, again, because we can't help but have stories and look for patterns and look for top-down causality. We'll mythologize science, we'll mythologize sex, we'll mythologize these other things, so that you'll then get a materialist magician, someone who can't believe in God, but who seeks spiritual power from us. Right? And so I think we've moved into that space where materialism doesn't work anymore. The veil is opening up. The war in heaven, to use Charles Williams' phrase, is becoming clearer. But we've been so trained against Jesus that people are looking to these other powers and beginning to allow those patterns to shape their lives, let's say.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find the quote exactly for you. Oh, I found it. We have great hopes that we shall learn in due time how to emotionalize and mythologize their science to such an extent that what if, in effect, a belief in us, the demonic, though not under that name, of course, will creep in while the human mind remains closed to belief in the enemy. The life force will be a helpful term, the worship of sex, some aspects of psychoanalysis. These may prove useful if once we can produce our perfect work, the materialist magician, the man not using but practically worshiping what he vaguely calls a force or a power while denying the existence of God and angels, then the end of our war will have been in sight. We will have dragooned the human spirit once and for all, right? And you see this mythologization, the way that, have y'all seen the book by Tara Isabella Burton called Strange Rites?
Not yet.
Not.
It's fascinating. What she does is describe the way that everyone is ritualizing things right now. You think of I think this is why the worship of Halloween is coming out. She talks about ritualizing, eating paleo becoming kind of this like religion for people. And you see communities forming around it and ethical norms being formed, people being shunned, whether or not they keep the religious ritual properly. These tech companies, right, creating religious rituals around the release of a new AI or a new tech. I don't know if you've seen the CERN celebration. Do y'all know what CERN is?
Yeah. But there was go ahead, please describe it.
Well, so when they started CERN, they had a huge, highly symbolic kind of ritual festival with celebrating that. And I'm not totally, gosh, I haven't looked this up in a while, but I'd have to go do a little research and then maybe drop a link later because I'm not remembering the specifics. But more and more tech companies are recognizing, well, you've got people saying that they're building God with AI, right? I mean, there's just the peak mythologization of science right there for you, is that we're mythologizing and emotionalizing our tech to the point that we think we're creating something to worship.
There is no God, but we're creating them.
Yeah. The perfect work, the materialist magician.
Well, but it seems like we're besieged on both sides, because when I think of Newton, I do not think of a person who's hostile to education. I mean, this is I believe he's Neil deGrasse Tyson's favorite scientist. Just because he changed so much in one lifetime.
Yes.
But in the Christian right, we have a surge of because of scientism within the secular space, there is a hyper anti-scientific surge that you might call it hyper skepticism about anything scientific, and so and that leads to a great deal of superstitious thinking, magical thinking within that realm, just as you're seeing a lot of the magical thinking you're describing in the secular realm. And it what we're seeing is a kind of collapse of respect for disciplined reason on both sides, in both hemispheres of the culture. Do you see that too? Have you given it any thought, I guess I should say?
Yes. What I see more is, I don't see anti-science science attitudes so much. That's not to say they're not there. They are. But in terms of like prevalent trends, what I see is anti-institutional trends. So do y'all listen to Brett Weinstein very much? Ever?
Familiar.
Dark Horse?
Familiar. Yeah, I'm not a
But I
big
find-
listener, but I'm familiar.
Yeah, what I find fascinating about him is, I mean, he's an agnostic or atheist evolutionist, right? So certainly not a conservative Christian, certainly not prone to magical thinking. But I see him as just like a genuine truth seeker who really values integrity and honesty, and he has courage, showing that our scientific institutions have actually become dominated by financial and political interests and actually aren't very reliable dispensaries of scientific knowledge right now. We have the reproducible crisis, that people will publish a paper, but then they can't reproduce the results. So I know that there was in the early 20th century among like fundamentalist Christians a kind of anti-science withdrawal from the academy because they just felt so overwhelmed and beleaguered by shifts in philosophy and science and modern thought and unable to kind of like cope with it in sort of a retreat mode. I don't see that mode so much as a trend right now, honestly. Again, not to say it's not
like
there.
Donald Trump, Trump talking about don't take the Tylenol. Just avoid the Tylenol. It causes autism. The Tylenol's bad. And then you turn around and you see skeptic health influencers saying, instead of taking Tylenol, I'm taking this generic brand of acetaminophen. And what it has is acetaminophen.
It's so dumb.
When it's mind explodingly stupid, but it's see, for me to say that is very insulting to people because they've so tuned down their capacity for rational examination of various things, whatever's put before them. So if I think you get where I'm coming from. To me, it seems it's very alive and well.
I don't see that as a right issue. Because you saw on people on the left who were just like taking a lot of Tylenol just to stick it to Trump. That's not a very scientific.
That's what I'm saying. I said it's both hemispheres of the political divide are possessed by certainly a spirit that I don't think C.S. Lewis would respect, or Newton.
Right. I really resonated with something. My goodness, I'm forgetting his name right now. Forgive me, friend, who I'm forgetting your name. He said on X, what is it, yesterday or today? Father, forgive them for they are retarded. Like that there's just...
Was that be Kale?
No, it wasn't Kale.
Oh, it sounds like...
Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry, friend, for not remembering your name right now. That's just what happens to my perimenopausal brain every time I'm put on the spot to remember something, right? It just short circuits and can't do it. But yes, so there is a kind of intellectual shutdown in certain corners. Why is that happening? That's a good question to ask in terms of this like prophetic sense making that we're trying to do. And I wonder somewhat if it's just we do live in the age of information where we are overwhelmed by information. We also are living in the midst of propaganda wars.
Yeah.
And I don't know that most people are just made to cope with that landscape.
Do you think people are waking up to it?
I think there's a sifting. Let's Lewis says this in That Hideous Strength. It's a passage where I can't remember the character's name, but one of the older characters, he's a professor, he's talking to his wife, and he's saying, as as the world unfolds, as the cosmic story unfolds, things are coming to a point. If you go back in time, he's a philologist, and so Lewis is making this analogically from a philological argument. If you look at language, you go into ancient Hebrew, ancient Greek, one word would have a wide range of meanings, that the way that they spoke and understood was more polyvalent, let's say. The classic example, forgive me for just using a classic example, was spirit, breath. They meant the same. It had a holistic meaning. To say breath would mean both air and spirit at the same time. And then as languages develop, words get more and more specific, more and more narrow. And so Lewis saw that as analogous to what was going on at other levels of culture, where things are getting more and more pointed, more and more specific. So he thinks good is getting better and evil is getting worse. And that's why I think COVID and the shooting of Charlie Kirk, they feel apocalyptic in the sense of revelatory, of revealing the minds and hearts. Whereas when we're not in an apocalyptic moment, when things are a little more normal and more stable and more easy, it's easier to go along to get along, and it's easy to be a good person if you live in a culture that's stable and doesn't put you under much stress, right? But under times of collapse and under times of stress, they're revelatory. They reveal whether you really are seeking the truth or not. They reveal whether or not you love your neighbor or not. They reveal. Okay. And so that's some of what I feel like I'm seeing on both left and right? The people who really desire truth and who don't. The people who seek virtue and who don't.
Jordan Hall, a while ago, I heard in an interview, he said that these events would first start like blips on radar, and then the blips would get so frequent that they would actually become like a tone. And I feel like we're blipping almost in a pattern, but it's not quite a tone, and the tone feels like it's coming, and the tone is not a song. It's a collapsing society that's under constant pressure. Which, to say it, you're like, oh, but to have that realization and to walk in it, and that's for me, that's how to be prepared. Don't expect mercy. Don't expect goodness. Don't be surprised when you're attacked. And the only thing I've got that I really better be about is, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Or like your friend said, they're idiots. I can roll with that one.
Well, you can see this as the same. No. Forgive them. They don't know what they do. They can't see. Their eyes are darkened. Their minds are darkened. Whatever colloquial language you want to use. I think that there really is actually genuinely a resonance there.
Right. And I guess what I'm trying to do is name the resonance and be prepared for it. And because I think maybe I've already been walking in it. I don't like it, but you're in it, whether you like it or not. It's like drugs. You take a drug, you're there. So we're in a trip. So how do you navigate it? And for me, it would be with Christ and love. That's the only way. Even if you lose, you will win. Now, I've totally black-pilled it right now. What is the possible white pill that... And I guess I'm shifting gears a touch because okay, the only comfort I have is most everything that I ever come up never happens. So maybe things aren't as bad as I think they are. And what are your thoughts on how society is going, and not so much what's going to happen, but maybe possible outcomes or possible patterns that you see that might be happening?
Mm-hmm. I think, like that idea of things are coming to a point, the darkness is getting darker, the light is getting lighter. And so there really is, we do feel this two-sided coin, right? In terms of the black pill of like, it's bad. There's, and I think that was part of the Charlie Kirk
Yep.
event that was so potent, is seeing the darkness. I keep thinking of I keep trying to think of the movie image that fits this. So maybe y'all can tell me, but it's like that moment in battle where all of a sudden a whole second round of orcs or spiders crawls out from the cracks that you
Right.
didn't realize was there. When you thought you only had 100,000 orcs to fight, and then all of a sudden another 100,000 crawls out through
Yeah.
the cracks. It was this
Yeah.
kind of moment where people would, whether you, again, whether you like him or not, he was a pretty normie person, honestly, and people celebrating his death with this kind of demonic level of darkness. So we see there's the black pill side. We see the darkness getting darker. We see its potency. But then the other side of that is the white pill side, is we also see the good getting brighter. The fact that Christ, the name of Jesus Christ, does have power over darkness. We also see that. We also, this is what I learned from my own psychedelic experience. So I spent a season in New Age, and I don't know if you remember this book, The Celestine Prophecy. It's interesting because I also experienced it, like, in that space. I know exactly what you're talking about. Patterns emerge that aren't patterns, and spirits emerge that aren't just projections of your own experience.
Yeah, there's real, I call them critters. Just to let you know, my colloquialism is, there's critters out there, and some of them are bad to the bone. They're real deal. So anyhow,
and what I experience in that landscape is there is no power under heaven that has authority like the name of Jesus Christ. And that's your white pill, is as dark as it gets. There is a king of heaven and earth who has all power under heaven and earth, right? And he wins. We know how this story ends. He wins. And so then, like, how do we navigate that? I've been thinking about this a lot in the context, of course, of Lewis, because he's my main interlocutor. Obedience. For Lewis, it comes down to obedience. So this battle, okay, the veil is thinning. We're seeing the cosmic battle. We're on this bad trip, whether we want to be or not, right? But it's a heavenly battle, which means the battle belongs to the Lord, as Scripture tells us. The battle belongs to the Lord. It is His battle to lead, His battle to win. He is the victor. And I think that, this is what Christians go wrong on the right, is when we think, oh, we have to strategize how to win the war. We have to grasp at power. Then there's a temptation to get your strong man Trump to come and win the battle for you.
Right.
All maybe with good intentions. But what we forget is we are not in an epistemological position as finite little creatures who live in time and cannot see. We cannot be the ones to figure out how to solve this battle, win this battle. That only God can see His ultimate purposes, and all people across all space and time and all of those intricacies. Only He can lead that battle. Then our job as any good, and Lewis was very aware of this as a soldier from World War I, our job is to obey our commands. Our job is obedience to what God has given us this day as our task of faithfulness. And we let God be the one to worry about how to win the battle. We worry about doing what we've been told to do. And when you think that way, actually, it's very clear what I need to do today and tomorrow and the next week. I've been giving my marching orders, and that's enough for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think Lewis sees obedience
So
as the
let me
key
interrupt
to
Ron.
navigating this landscape.
Yeah, sorry. So holiness and sanctification is what I hear when you talk about obedience. That's what I hear.
Yeah.
Um.
And there might be particular tasks, like as a mother, as a wife, holiness. I need to cook dinner. That's why I have to go at 5. I have children to take care of. So it's holiness and sanctification, but while acknowledging that I'm also an educator, I have classes to prepare for tomorrow. There's also particular tasks, and some of that is perceiving the way that reality is made to work. That God made the world to be built from families. Families gather together to raise children, to coordinate our affairs. So just not to over spiritualize it, if it just means holiness in the sense of, well, we shall be monks out praying. Not necessarily. In our holiness, in our sanctification, we are given like specific practical tasks too that are part of.
Yeah, obedience looks, for a Christian, obedience, in my mind, has a very specific footprint. I don't believe a Christian has permission to do evil to stop evil. I mean, it's
yeah.
Put up your sword, Peter.
Well, that's pretty much it. And then Jesus comes along and fixes the damage, right? So that the plan can commence. I mean, you mentioned like feeling resonance in heaven at the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Yes, but where was that resonance for Christians with the political assassination of the Democrat Melissa Hartman and her husband?
I have an answer for that.
Hold on. You can answer, but this is actually Annie's interview.
Not right. Excuse us, Annie. We got to work something out.
Or even that attack on Paul Pelosi with a hammer. It strikes me as holiness and sanctification require us to see the spiritual and see God's command regardless of our party or denominational or religious affiliations, that we seek justice, and we seek justice for all, without equivocation. What do you think? Do you have any? Is that resonating at all? I apologize for a poorly phrased question.
Yeah. Maybe I can transition to Ron's thought too. Yes, I was horrified at the attack on Pelosi, as well as the Democrat representative. Forgive me for not remembering their name.
Melissa Hartman.
Yeah. So, and I saw people, I didn't see anyone celebrate those things in my circles, let's say. Right. So part of the difficulty of this landscape is just the fragmentation of our spheres of discourse. Right. And so I try to keep good feelers out there broadly. It's pretty hard to do, right? Completely. So just to say, agree with you. I felt horror and shock at those events too. I do think they did symbolically resonate as powerfully for kind of objective reasons. I think the fact that Charlie Kirk was contending so actively for free speech and then was shot doing free speech in a place of free speech layers these levels of symbolic resonance that made it so potent, regardless of more normie political differences, if that makes sense. So does that make any sense? Ron, did you have a thought to add to kind of why one thing resonated more than another? Well, yes, we should be horrified at all, and everyone who does violence in that way, right, should have proper repercussions within the polity.
Right. That's all I was going to say. Same thing. I think also because it was live, It was,
Yeah.
you're seeing a man.
Saw it.
Like, yeah, like when and Mark, to your point, because I did think about what you said a while ago. When the family was killed in Michigan, because I thought I did pray in that moment. I remember because I'm like, and to be honest with you, I knew at that moment the bar had been lowered. I knew
Mm.
that's the new normal. It's just I didn't celebrate it at all. I'm like, oh crap. It didn't hit me as viscerally just because I didn't see it, but I'm sure if I saw it, I'd have wigged out as well. And
Mhm.
I think after this conversation, what I'm realizing, it's just violence in general seems to be getting normalized on both sides, or just violence in the spirit of murder.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm like, oh, okay. What are you thinking, Anne?
Yeah. And I think that's part of the collapse of the old world if we try and bring it together. Sorry, I talk with my hands and I'm holding up my phone to
Oh, yeah.
try and get like good surface so we can keep talking.
Love it.
Um, that for a little while, I think it was on your channel, Paul Vanderklay talked about someone who is commenting that, we've thought that certain moral values are just universal or rationally obvious when they're not really, that's sort of the latent effect of Christendom. That when we entered into the modern era, we had 1,000 to 1,500 years of Christendom building up Christian culture, a certain Christian moral framework. This is Tom Holland's argument from Dominion. And then we just kind of naively, understandably, mistook what we all accepted as moral truths, the equal value of women, or the importance of taking care of the poor, or, that those are just rational, universal moral values that people just have. When they're not, before Christianity, women were not given equal value. Slavery was considered totally rational, before Christianity. And so what I think we're seeing is that's part of the collapse of this facade, which sees moral assumptions as self-evident, universal, or rationally based. One of those being, you see this a lot kind of going around social media, that now you've got 40% of college students who thinks violence is an acceptable way of dealing with disagreement. Right? We thought, we all accepted that you don't just shoot someone for their opinion. You don't just kill people you disagree with. Actually, that universal rational moral value is not so widely held anymore. So that's kind of part of this fall of our old, modern, rational, moralistic framework. And then this open, chaotic space of, well, how are we going to establish our shared values so that we can function civilly together as a society? And I feel like that's really up in the air, right? And that this is where the conversation around Christian nationalism is emerging of, well, if we got these values we like from Christ, maybe we should return to lifting Christ up as the unifying good around which we live again, right? But then that raises, well, we all kind of like our secular pluralism. Can't we have our cake and eat it too? I'm very sympathetic to that. I don't like conflict. I have been raised to enjoy, but how do we construct at the fall of modern rationalism? How can we still hold on to or reconstruct any kind of pluralistic space? That's the question of what new world is being born out of this chaotic apocalyptic moment.
What does obedience look like in this age, where you have a society that is in kind of what you described as a kind of moral free fall. But a church that's called to obedience, a church that's not even certain who is and who isn't in the church, a kind of church that's in a state of considerable confusion, excuse me.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's keep Lewis as the sun around which we orbit. So everyone within the Lewis orbit, what does obedience look like for them in such times?
Yeah. There's, in a way, this is what Lewis is exploring in The Abolition of Man. Most of it's black pill, describing the moral collapse. There's a little bit at the end that's trying to gesture toward a direction in which we can go. And I think as I was preparing, this quote came to mind as one that might be relevant to our conversation. He says in Abolition of Man, the cardinal problem for the wise men of old was how to conform the soul to reality. And the solution was knowledge, self-discipline, virtue. And so in the old world, there was this idea that this was a cosmos. This was a logos-shaped world. We were logos-shaped creatures. There was a pattern and an order to the world. And then wisdom and virtue and flourishing and happiness came from disciplining myself to live in accordance, in harmony with that cosmic song, that logos order. But he says that for the modern person, our problem is how to subdue reality to the wishes of men. And the solution is technique and technology, right? So for the modernist, you don't have a logos, you don't have a cosmos, you don't have a logos-shaped world. You just have raw material that you discern a technique so you can manipulate material according to your will. And I think that framework, for me, answers the question, is that we learn to perceive the God-created order of the world again, and we practice living in harmony with that order. And so that there's a kind of, Lewis lays that out, a three-prong approach. Knowledge, we have to renew, and this is why I love working in education, renewing education so it's like we become blind to the meaning, the purpose, the structure of the world, helping our next generation. And that's why I work both at the level of students and adults, because the next generation we want to raise to be able to see, but we've also got an adult generation that needs to recover also the ability to see. So knowledge, self-discipline, we have to practice ascesis, as the Orthodox say, we have to practice saying no to ourselves. Limits. I think it was Martin Shaw who says we have to make a covenant with limits. That in order for there to be order, there have to be limits. For me to be me, I'm not you. For me to be a woman, I'm not a man. For me to live in Austin, I don't live in Montana. And just to practice limits, to practice saying no. Whereas so much of our culture is like, how do I get enough money to buy a product that gives me everything I want? We have to reject that old frame and adopt a frame that says the limits that God has given me are good. In fact, that's what makes me who I am.
But does that apply? Are you applying those limits to yourself? Or I think we got a lag. I apologize. Are we applying those limits to ourselves, or are we going to impose them on the broader society with or without their willing participation?
Oh, so you want to ask the hard question?
Yeah.
No, Mark, I think that is the question. So for those of us who, let's say, orbit C.S. Lewis or are moving within this understanding, okay, the question you're asking is the conversation I keep having again and again right now. Because And I'll do my best to offer how I see it with humility. Part of the modern frame was the rise of individualism, that we're going to begin to see ourselves as autonomous units. So I'm actually right now teaching early modern political philosophy. And it's so interesting how before the modern era, we saw ourselves in relational structures. Who is Odysseus? He is the king of Ithaca, the father of Telemachus, the wife of Penelope. His identity is essentially embedded within a network of relationships, primarily like organic, relationships to place and people, hereditary and embodied relationships. In the modern era, we moved to seeing the nature of our relationships, what defines my identity and connects me to other people, as fundamentally rooted in choice, consent, and financial structures. And I think that is part of what is falling apart. Now, what's really scary about that is we are so deeply formed by a sense of autonomy, we're so scared of, it's a very scary shift to go through. I think we have to go through it. I think we have to say, my primary identity and my primary good and my primary responsibility are not defined by me as an isolated individual. Like it or not, we're on a bad trip. Like it or not, I am born into a web of relationships and responsibilities. And that my moral agency, in so much as I pursue wisdom, discipline, and virtue, is I have a responsibility for myself first and primarily, but I also exist in this network of relationships. So one example, so I'm just trying to tease out the frame in which we're asking the question in order to try and get some clarity as we move outward. So at the level of family, I have to practice self-discipline. I have to hold my children accountable to practice self-discipline too, right? So individualism got to the point where parenting is like, oh, my job is just to provide a house. Well, the kid in my house pursues their own, self-expression and discovery. Well, that's garbage. Like, that makes for such lost, miserable, undisciplined children, right? So take it to the extreme, okay, that my obedience, my self-discipline does, as a parent at least, is not limited to simply me. I am born, I exist in this familial relationship, and in order to bring my life into conformity with the way God created it is going to mean I exercise a certain amount of authority over my children, mutual accountability with my husband. Okay, that exists within the familial structure. The question is, how much does that pattern of moral agency and responsibility extend beyond, let's say, the family unit as well, in terms of how we as a society hold one another accountable to live in conformity with the created order, right? Is that the question you're getting at? Right? And then the question is, I think we have to, I just think any society has to have standards of, you don't murder, you don't rape, and then the question is that the line at which it's a prudential question, right? How much as the civic polity circumscribe the behavior of its members in order to order our shared life toward the good? That those are going to be difficult prudential questions we have to wrestle out. But we can no longer think of well, I just don't impose my morality on anybody, because we do.
I think the times where we talk about, I'm not going to impose my morality on other people, it's like, you do you, that spirit seems very 2019, so to speak. what I'm getting from what you're saying, and also I think Jordan Hall was saying in your discussion with him, is that we need to strengthen our own communities, networks, families, harden ourselves, yeah, make ourselves more grounded and resilient. And if we build our house on the rock, the storm can swirl around us, and we will not only survive, but we will grow, because we will be a place of safety for those who feel threatened by the chaos.
Can I throw something else in here, which I find interesting?
And you got
And
2 minutes, Ron.
quick. Oh, I'll make it even quicker than that. I wonder. I'm thinking maybe that for me, that's what interacting with y'all TLC has become. Because if I hadn't Mark and Clara and you and so many others, my life would have been really rough. We all go through stuff, but I was able to process it with you guys.
Mm-hmm.
And so digital I'd rather have people in front of me, but if you could have good people online, legitimately solid people to talk with, to talk you off the ledge or through the darkness, that's not bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is because I think, Mark, I like what you were saying. What I pictured as you were talking is, my gosh, I'm putting my phone down so I can use my hands. I do think Pageau's image of the cosmic mountain is really helpful to think of. God's given the world an order that we live in harmony with, right? So you've got this idea of this cosmic mountain. And then insofar as I am given a sphere of responsibility, I seek to live in harmony within that sphere, which I think we're recognizing is not just me as an isolated individual, but a sphere that has a web of a network of relationships. To grow into that order, to live into that harmony, and that the more that we do that, right, we restore a stable structure to the world without trying to seize power from the top, right? Which, as you're saying, I mean, Ransom says this in that hideous strength. Merlin comes back, sorry, spoiler, and he's like, well, we got to get the king to deal with this great evil. And he's like, there's no king. And he's like, well, we got to get the emperor. And he's like, yeah, there's no emperor. There is no Christian prince. And this is not the way the world is structured anymore. And then Ransom says, and insofar as we are trying to fight this great evil that's destroying the order of the world, we cannot adopt its methods or its techniques. Mm-hmm. We just have to try to live into that order obediently the best we can within our sphere of influence, and trust that as we do that, right, the king to whom the battle belongs will be orchestrating his armies for our good. So in our sphere of influence, though, if I'm J.D. Vance and I'm vice president, well, then the sphere of influence in which God has put me is going to be much greater than Annie Crawford's sphere of influence within Austin, right? And then the other question I think is interesting to think about in this transitional moment is the digital space, Ron, which is what you bring up, is the fact that, okay, not only do we have our spheres of influence within our local community, we have this strange emergent world, which Mary Harrington recently called like the land of fairy, this digital land of fairy, where we have also started to build relationships where I think that I think it's a legitimate sphere. I think we need to remember to keep it secondary and properly ordered within our incarnate lives, but it's still a legitimate sphere in which we know and relate and encourage one another. And it can be, Ron, as you say, really healing and fruitful, so long as we allow it to feed back into our embodied lives and don't just get sucked into the matrix, right?
Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of On Ramp Radio. A big thank you to Annie Crawford for taking time out of her busy schedule to join us and for hanging in there through our technical difficulties. You can learn more about her work by going to anniecrawford.net, or you can follow her on X, formerly known as Twitter. All you have to do is type at Annie L. Crawford into the search field. I also want to thank my good friend Ron Copperman. This conversation really wouldn't have happened without his initiative. And of course, my thanks to you, our listeners, for tuning in and being part of the On-Ramp Radio community. I'm Mark D. Parker. Until next time, God bless.